So, I'm back out of prison. I'm relatively poor. I've only got a couple of £100 to my name. They've put me in a bail hostel in Cornwall because accommodation has always been one of the things I've struggled with coming out of prison. I can pretty much hold down everything else. I always end up making money. I can always walk into a job normally. I interview well. I come across well. I don't look like a criminal. So it's normally easy to get myself into employment eventually. But it's normally just those first few weeks that I struggle with, because I always end up wanting to make fast money, and that's always been my downfall, is because I always end up making criminal money, or drugs money, or robbery money, and then going to try and hold down a job. And in the end, the police always come and get me for something I did in the first few weeks or months. That bites me on the ass when I'm 6 months down the road and wanting to hold down a normal life. So my plan this time was to try and stay out of trouble. I wanted to live like I did in prison, just simply. I got myself a little TV from the market. I got myself a little Xbox, the original first generation Xbox. A lot of those games are still brand new to me because I've been in prison for a lot of the time it had been out. The hostel I was staying in has a little gym built up in the garage, which had a punch bag down there. So I spent a lot of time in the gym just training and punching the bag, trying to build up my fitness. When I wasn't in the gym, I was out walking. So much time you spend in prison, you spend sitting in your bed or stuck behind the walls. It was nice to just get out after 8 o'clock at night and walk up to the shops and go and buy a bar of chocolate, something like that. It's a real novelty. It doesn't mean much now, but when you get out, those little things are massive. I really didn't want to end up back in prison again. The first weekend after I got out, Boardmasters was on in Newquay. This would be somewhere that I would normally go and take a load of drugs, go and party, and have a great time. This time, I was trying to avoid it best I could, but I still ended up going up there on the Saturday. My friend was going to go up there on the Saturday night, and he'd managed to get me on the guest list, so I got myself in for free. I wasn't drinking at the time much. I only had a couple of beers. My friend was selling some MDMA, and he took some in there. I had the smallest amount of MDMA because I was being drug tested at the bail hostel. It didn't matter about alcohol, but I was being drug tested because that was obviously one of my triggers for going back to prison. So I didn't want to take too much, knowing full well that I'd end up getting caught and sent back to prison straight away. But that moron in me, I've only been out of prison 4 or 5 days, and I'm already sampling MDMA. I ended up getting a lift back to the bail hostel. I left Boardmasters at around 10 o'clock, give myself plenty of time to get back to where I was needing to go. But just as my lift came up to the road to come and pick me up, they closed off the road behind him, so they could start letting people across the road to get back to the campsite, which really scuppered us because now we only had just enough time to get around St Morgan and heading off back towards the bail hostel. I got back to the bail hostel about 15 minutes late. This was bad news. You really shouldn't be late, especially coming back drunk and possibly slightly high on MDMA still as well. So I could have been in big trouble that first weekend out. So they gave me a drug test. They sent me up to my room. They told me everything would be okay. Now, bearing in mind they told me this before when I was there, and within a couple of hours the police were knocking on the door and sending me back to prison. So I got my bag together. I got my phone in my pocket. I was ready to jump out of the window as soon as I heard anything suspicious going on. I was not going back to prison again. Now, luckily that night nothing happened. I saw them again the next day, and they kind of told me off for being late, but they definitely weren't going to send me back to prison. Now, a couple of days after all of this happened, things were just getting back to normal. I was starting to get myself back into society. It was nice and hot. It was sunny that summer. One of my old pals from prison turned up at the bail hostel as well. There was a couple of people in there I knew now, and we were enjoying life together. Now, he was not planning on living as clean as I was. So he bought. He was a Plymouth lad. He was an enforcer from Plymouth. He was the lad that was 6'8" and 20 odd stone. He brought some cocaine down as a sample. Now, I again, after my little scare on that Saturday night, I wasn't about to start taking any coke or anything, but I could see obviously the value of bringing drugs down and then selling it here, and I thought I could still make some money from that. I didn't want to directly do anything, but I did think there was a bit of money that I could be made on the side for just introducing people. Now, obviously, that is highly illegal as well, and nothing actually ever took place. But I took my friend up to Newquay to go and introduce them to some of my friends up there. Now, they all had a good time. I couldn't touch anything, so I didn't do anything. But when we came back a couple of nights later, that I found that when I woke up in the morning, my pal had been arrested. They actually snuck into the room, the police, in the middle of the night and put the handcuffs on him in bed. Because I remind you, he's 6'8" and 20 odd stone. He was a violent offender. He used to be a taxman in Plymouth. Now, he didn't ever take any weapons with him. He would just sort of kick the door off and go and talk to whoever was inside and convince them that they had to hand their drugs and money over. He was notorious around Plymouth as well. So anybody who knows who I'm talking about, who knows who he is. He's sadly dead now. The big lad didn't make it, but he got arrested at the bail hostel overnight and taken back to prison. It was probably a good idea, really, because I was fully ready to obviously take a cut of whatever they were making and start living immorally again. It wouldn't have been long until I was back on that path back to prison. I got myself a job working as a labourer for one of a carpenter, a friend of mine that I'd used to work for before, on and off. This time, I should have had a CS card, but I really didn't. So I was working illegally on the site. It was the least of my worries at that point. I was just trying to make some money to get by. The bail hostel were charging me rent, £90 a week. You've still got to find that money and pay them, and find money to try and move out of there as well and save up. I did eventually get myself out of that bail hostel and moved into a place, a small flat up the road. It was my own place. I ended up getting off my probation and having no more drugs tests. And I did, that very first weekend, start going out and partying. I took a large concoction of drugs and drank a bottle of whiskey to myself and partied my fucking tits off. I ended up partying, being a regular thing, partying every weekend then, from sort of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and on to Monday sometimes, every weekend, having house parties with friends and obviously just getting caught up in that life again. I met my wife and on a dating website, and she eventually decided to meet me. She didn't want to be meeting someone from my town, and she did her best to avoid me for 3 months. But my charms finally worked, and she decided to go out on a date with me. It was one of the biggest factors of me staying out of prison this time, was meeting her, because she showed me a different way of life, a life that was worth staying out of prison for. Unfortunately, at that time, I was still partying, and I quit my job as a labourer and started signing on. The partying was getting out of control. I was doing too much. I wasn't making enough money. I was always getting sanctioned at the job centre because I was late. At that point, I didn't really want a job. I was quite happy just sitting at home, making no money at all. My partner at that time, she was working in a care home, so she was the only one really bringing in any money. At that point, I didn't know I shouldn't have been signing on. She should have been paying for me. So eventually the job centre would contact me and claim all of that money back. But because I've been in prison so long and I never used to sign on before, this was a whole new experience for me. Just the whole process of signing on and filling out the 10 pages of forms. Now, anybody who's had to fill out those forms know that they're probably set up to make you fail and fill them out wrong and to get you in trouble. But I from 18. So bearing in mind I've left school I've spent 2 years being a criminal, and then I've ended up in prison for the best part of 10 years. And the next thing now, I'm stuck here, doing things on my own, with no one really to help me. Yeah, so just signing on at the job centre was a task for me, and turning up on time, every fortnight was a task. Now, after 6 months of not finding a job, they put you onto these kind of like enhanced courses where they every week you have to go in and see this lady. I broke my hand punching the door in a rage. Anger is something that I've always had a problem with, and it's something I still struggle with daily. But I'd punched the door, and the door had won. It was shut, and it was a hardwood door, and it had broke the bone in my little finger. So I was finding it difficult to do any kind of manual labour, and with my criminal record, it's very difficult to find a job, especially if I wasn't really looking that hard, because I just tell this lady that as soon as I tell any employer that, you know, I've been arrested from my last place of work, you know, I was an armed robber, I've sold drugs, I have barely any education skills. The only thing I know is how to rob people and scam my way through life. Employers aren't usually queuing up to employ somebody like me. But again, like I say, once I actually turn on the charm and once I actually apply myself, then I can normally do anything I want. It wasn't difficult finding a job when I wanted to. I ended up in a call centre. They were taking on sort of 20, 30 people at a time, so they weren't really checking people's credentials too much. Nobody really looked into my history too much, and as long as I was willing to turn up every day and take some abuse on the phone, then they would employ me and even give me a commercial bonus. I actually quite liked it there. A lot of people found the job difficult. A lot of people wouldn't even last the shift. I quite enjoyed it. My philosophy was that, you know, nobody was going to stab me, so what's the worst they can do? Even if the employers shouted and screamed at me for not hitting target, then again, I just walked out of the room at the end of the day, and then they still paid me. I'd spent years in prison with repercussions of what I did and said that could have genuinely threatened my life. So now having an employer just telling me that I really need to hit my targets and do better, it didn't really affect me at all. One day, I was starting work. I was in the first sort of half an hour of my shift, and I got a message from my girlfriend saying that the police had raided our flat. This made my heart sink. I'd been out of prison around about 6 months at this point. This was the usual time when I would end up back in prison. I went over and told my call centre manager that the police had just raided the house, and my wife, not really knowing my girlfriend at the time, not really knowing what to do, she told the police where I worked, and they were on the way over. So I told the manager that they would be on the way over and that I'd probably have to go off with them. He said just carry on the phones and we'll deal with it when they get here. I ended up making one more phone call before he came over and tapped me on the shoulder and told me that the police were down at reception. I got off the phone and I went downstairs, and there was a couple of uniformed officers stood down there with a couple of CID. The actual owner of the company is an absolute mentalist, and he came running down the stairs and ushered us into one of the meeting rooms and said, "Oh, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. You can do your interview in this interview room, and you can then go back on the phones." He was in this bubble of his call centre and didn't realise the real world went on around it, and the police quickly informed him that they would be taking me and they wouldn't be able to do the interview downstairs at the office. Just as I walked out of the call centre building with my new CID chums, one of them kind of looked over to me and said, "We hear you've been going up to Liscard." Now, this is a tactic to kind of just give me a breadcrumb of information to kind of make them think that they know what I've been up to, and to make me panic a little bit. Now, obviously I've got friends in Liscard, I've got friends all over the county, I've got friends who I've met in prison from that area. So what they were trying to do is trying to make me panic and just trying to let me think that they've got more on me than they may have. We got into the car and they took me down to Camborne Police Station. When I got to the custody area there, just before we went inside, one of the officers said to me, he offered me a cigarette and said, I might as well take it now because I might be going away for a while. I told him to fuck off. I said I'd be walking out of this police station this afternoon. Now, I had no idea that I would. At worst, they may have a load of evidence of me doing something. At best, they had nothing at all, and they were just fishing. And I'd been taken by the police plenty of times. They arrest you, they take you down to custody, they see what you're doing, they search your house. They know that I was involved in crime on a regular basis, so they knew that if they searched me once every few months that they'd probably catch me doing something. Even if it wasn't what they expected to find me doing, they'd probably catch me doing something. So I had no idea what it was that they were going for this time. I got my solicitor and we sat down and they gave us the evidence. The police felt that since I got out of prison that I'd gone back to my old ways of being a drug dealer, and they felt like I was supplying a large chunk of my town with recreational party drugs. They even had a parcel of drugs that had been bagged up and dropped off in Liskeard, ready to be passed on to a runner and then sold off in that area. They had a thumbprint of mine on that parcel of drugs. That was the only evidence they had against me. That was the only evidence that had been passed on to my solicitor at that point. So we gave a statement saying that obviously I didn't commit any more crimes at the moment and I was honest and working. That one of my ex-partners from Liskeard had phoned me one day and said that her new boyfriend had hidden a parcel of drugs in her bag, and knowing of my past, she asked me if I could help her identify it. So I went up there to go and speak to her and looked at the parcel. Couldn't identify it myself, so I gave the parcel back to her and told her that she should probably dispose of it. That was probably the safest thing to do. Now, obviously, that explained why my thumbprint was on the bag of drugs, and also possibly why that parcel of drugs may have ended up in a hedge. If she may have thrown it out the car after I'd seen her. But obviously, the police didn't have much to go on, evidence-wise, then to arrest me for anything. So I ended up getting a no further action. The most frustrating thing was that once the police had realised that there was no charges against me because I hadn't done anything, that they came to speak to me, obviously knowing now that I was going straight, thinking that I may be able to give them any information and stuff. Now this is a regular thing that the police do, is they'll try and get information out of you, see if they can get you to become a paid informant, or even just information on criminal networks and how things work, just so you can help them out a bit. But I also know, and as I informed them, that there are people working in the police that get paid to feed that information back to the criminals. So any statements and any evidence you give to the police sometimes isn't safe at all. Now, I got released from the police station. I've been in there all day. We got the no further action, so there was no more charges going to be put against me. I managed to get back home. My girlfriend was so relieved to see me. She thought that was going to be it, that she wasn't going to see me again for years and years. I had to treat that as a real wake-up call. There's no more fun and games. It's really difficult to kind of live this kind of life of holding down a job, and then also have the disruption of police and criminal living before. Previously, I tried to sell weed and hold down a job at the same time, but the two worlds just end up colliding. You've got people who are your best customers who end up becoming either addicted or they just smoke more than they can afford to pay for. So there's always an excuse when it comes to payday. They'll pay you some of the bill but not all of it, or they'll tell you because they've had to go and get weed off somebody else because you cut them off, then suddenly they've got to pay that guy back and they can't pay you. There's always excuses. There's always bullshit around supplying drugs to people. I'd love to think that if you did start up again, that you always get the smooth with the you always get the money and the lifestyle without any of the hassle. But there's always the hassle that comes with it as well. So what I ended up having to do was cut everybody out who was criminal-minded or was part of my party days, who could lead me back down that road of just partying when I should be working. I needed to cut out a new life on my own. It was difficult, but I had my girlfriend, and that was all that I needed. She really supported me, and she really helped me through everything. She knew all about my criminal past, and it was really refreshing to just be able to be honest and push a new life forward with new goals and new ways of looking at things. I still found it difficult though. I didn't fit in with normal people. It's very difficult for me to fit in office lifestyles and just being able to communicate with normal people. I didn't want to go back to my old friends who I found it easy to be around, because those people didn't work. They spent all day in the pub selling drugs or fighting or robbing people, and that wasn't a lifestyle. It was too tempting to go back to that. Too much money can be made too easily doing that sort of thing. I found it difficult to not fight in the workplace. My only way of stopping people that I disagreed with or that found disagreement with me in other methods, so talked down to me, like call centre bosses and notorious arseholes, owners of companies making you work for next to nothing, making you jump through hoops for small bonuses. It was really difficult not to punch more people in the mouth than I really wanted to. I ended up getting promoted off the call centre floor after about 6 months of going through this work. It was the first time I'd tasted a positive reward for honest work. I got moved into an account management side of things rather than the sales on the call centre floor. So there was less targets, less pressure, and more of kind of just a reward for hard work. This meant that if I came in early, I got more done, I got more work, and this appealed to me. There was a real work reward kind of thing that happened there, and everything was going great for a few months. And then my old problems with authority kicked in and then changed, because and these are deep-rooted sets from prison, because obviously in prison, while everything's cruising along and nothing changes, then each day just blends into another one, and you get through your time. But we got some new management brought into our department to come and shake things up and shake up the way we were working to try and make more money. And I found myself kind of butting heads with them. Obviously, coming out of prison, I was butting heads with any kind of authority. So these could have been people asking me to even move my chair, possibly, and I would have found their approach difficult. Now, I didn't, again, know how to communicate with people properly, so I would always be loud, aggressive, kicking off, and I found myself eventually kicking off so regularly and with so many different members of staff that I had to quit, and I walked out of the place. I managed to find myself another job, and I quickly just tried to keep myself quiet and under the radar, and didn't want to make the same mistakes of kicking off and pushing back on authority again. But these kind of, you've got to remember, this is what this is my education since I was 18, to be loud and aggressive and to try and dominate a room all the time. So eventually it couldn't always be all bottled up. We were all working at another sales office, and the boss, it possibly was a bit of a scam, but he was paying us self-employed money, so we had to pay our own taxes, in theory, but we were getting about 350 quid a week plus commission, cash in hand, essentially, self-employed. Now, one of the managers who worked with us used to work for the big call centre that I used to work for, and that guy, I remember I said, was a complete fanatical moron. He was quite megalomaniac-ish, so he would like to try and put the spanner in the works with other companies as well, and we found out that the manager that worked with us had gone to go and have breakfast with the fanatical manager, owner of the company, sorry. And we all thought that he'd ratted us out for being self-employed, and that we were now going to have to go on the books, which meant losing, 20-30% of your wages. This wasn't good for me. As soon as I started losing money, my prisoner mentality came in. It felt like this guy had just taken money out of my pocket. Anybody who steals money from me, is stealing from my cake, and that would never happen in prison. It wouldn't happen when I'm a criminal, so it wasn't going to happen now. I saw red. It was first thing in the morning when I found out about this. People were still coming into work, so I think I went down to. I was going to go down to the snack machine down in the reception area, and go and get something to eat. And I bumped into the guy who had ratted us out to our old employer in the corridor. And I remember losing it with him. I pinned him up against the wall, and I remember threatening him and getting in his face about, fucking ratting us out, and that meant we was all going to lose money now because of him. And in no uncertain terms, I'd made it clear that none of us were happy with him and what he'd done. I stormed off, went off to the canteen. I remember him shouting after me, sort of kind of talk to me, because we were good friends before that. We'd worked in a couple of places, and I couldn't believe, what he'd done. Basically, it turned out that he hadn't ratted us out, that our boss was planning on taking us onto the payroll anyway, and this guy having a breakfast with our old boss was nothing to do with us losing this pay. So I'd essentially just kicked off at him for no reason at all. My boss came up to me though, and he was grinning ear to ear. He was actually perversely quite happy that I was kicking off and having a go at this guy, basically defending his company. So weirdly now, that was my way, that I was quite in with this boss. He didn't know, nobody knew I'd been in prison at this company, and I liked it like that. But as soon as he found out that I'd kicked off at this employer that I'd thought was selling us down the river, he was now my best mate. He did eventually find out I'd been in prison, and it turns out that his family were quite criminal. He had family living in southern Spain, and he's got a brother who's in prison. He was the one who was in the grey area, but he was basically good. So me and him got on then from then on, and it was basically a fucked up reward system that I got from that place, because every time I kicked off or I threatened to leave, then they would always give me a promotion, or they'd end up paying me more, or give me a change of job and a bit more responsibility, that sort of thing. I got promoted to being manager quite quickly there within a year or so, and it was just through being forceful. It wasn't through my ability to manage situations. It was just that I turned up every day, and I bossed the situation, but I wasn't good at my job. They were just all too scared of me to do anything about it. Eventually, the company wasn't making money, and I got sacked. I got made redundant. I walked out of there, and I walked into another job doing the same sort of thing. But eventually, I walked out of that job in a rage after having a go at the boss. The job after that, I ended up, because I didn't respect the boss, I ended up humiliating him in a one-to-one meeting. I told him that I didn't respect him as a man or as a boss. I saw his bottom lip quivering because he was obviously intimidated by me, and I found a bit of an enjoyment in that. It was feeding back to the old days, the old me that I didn't really want to go back to. But this man that I didn't respect had a power over me, and that beast that's inside me just couldn't live with it, and it messed with me for days. So I waited for my one-to-one, and I knew that it was coming, and I messed with him, and I stared him in the eye, and I could see that he doesn't like confrontation. As soon as things started getting a little bit heated, his bottom lip started going, and I just kind of kept him in that position, and kind of kept my tone with him, and just kept pushing him into this uncomfortable place that he didn't want to be. And I enjoyed it, and I revelled in it, and it's a horrible thing to say, and it's not something I'm proud of. It's something I've had to move away from, this whole enjoying dominating people. It's not a victory. And it ended up not being a victory. I ended up getting fucked over by that boss and having to leave. Ultimately, I may have won that small battle, in that interview, in that one-to-one. That small battle that was in my head from prison, from 15 years previous. It wasn't a battle that I should have still been fighting, but I was proud that I'd still won it at that day. He ended up, obviously, moving me into another department that became defunct, and then I ended up being made redundant. So I hadn't won anything. I'd lost out again, and I was still looking for another job. I became more belligerent with respect and authority. I earned good money from sales, but it was not enough to bite my tongue. I had to learn to try and be quiet. I had to learn to try and not dominate people. I was there to make money. I was there to pay my bills. That old reward system of terrifying people, of putting people down, of pushing my way across and up and above people to live my life was not something that I needed to do anymore. I didn't have to get big and strong because nobody was ever going to take advantage of me. I wasn't weak anymore. I wasn't afraid anymore. There was no reason for me to do any of that. I had to find new victories in life. Walking away and not punching someone in the mouth was my new victory. Not worrying about the police kicking my door in the morning was a new victory. Not having to go up and down the street every time I moved a parcel of drugs, looking in cars to make sure there wasn't police sitting outside my house. Being worried about who was going to grass on me next. Being worried about who was going to turn on me next. These are all the victories that I live for now. And they're the ones that are keeping me out of prison.